Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Valdes. I am the author of Chilling Effect and the forthcoming Prime Deceptions, both space operas that riff on pop culture and video games, including stuff like Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs. And so I am super, super excited to be here today interviewing the amazing Ari Salvatore, the author of so many books. Needs
Yeah.
almost no introduction, but his latest, Relentless, is a new book in the Drizzt series, and it is just so exciting to be here. And having read the series, I mean, it's just amazing stuff as usual. So we'll jump right into the questions, I guess, in talking about this new trilogy. It's now complete
Well,
with Relentless. Oh, I'm sorry.
before you do, before you do, open your eyes really wide. They're not green, right?
No, they are
Because if
not.
they were green, I would hang up
Okay,
because
no,
you're not going
definitely
to
brown.
hypnotize me.
No
No, I want to
hypnosis.
start. I want to start. Like, they sent me your book, and I picked it up. I just got it. I picked it up last night, and I'm having an absolute blast with it.
Thank
I'm
you.
showing your book, Chilling Effect, because this book is a riot.
Thank you.
No, really. I know the woman, the main character. She's my
Yes.
neighbor in California, and she's dear friends of us here in Massachusetts too. The way you keep going back and forth between the languages, and it only happens when they're excited. You can see that when they get mad or something. And now I grew up. My Italian aunts were exactly like that, and it would be like, "She's speaking Italian. Everybody run!" You know. I'm loving it. I really am.
Thank you.
I was
Thank you
just
so
planning to
much.
read a couple of pages, and I just couldn't stop last night. This is a great
Oh,
book.
thank you so much. I super appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I'm a California girl. I was born there, raised in Miami, and so, and my family is partly from Massachusetts. So there you go.
Well, I
But
wanted to get that out there because it's very rare that I read a book that'll hook me right away, and
oh,
now
thank you
I've got
so
to now
much.
I've got to try to keep writing while I'm reading the rest of your book. So I
Thank-
wanted to get that out there. I mean it. I'm having fun with it.
oh, thank you so much. I
Hypnotic
mean,
kittens.
coming from you, that means a lot. And I hope you enjoy the fight scenes because that's something that I know you probably hear all the time. But
Oh,
growing
good.
up,
I haven't seen one yet. Good.
oh, yeah, it'll get there. It's more pew pew than swords, obviously, but and of course I have the cat intruding on the
Yeah, I
scene
just
as
saw the
always.
tail, and I'm
Yeah.
like, don't hold that cat up. I don't want to get thanks.
That's the nature of the Zoom interview at this point, right? Is you're gonna have the pets come in and start making nuisances of themselves. And he's back. All right, hopefully I can settle him down. But so in the new trilogy we've got here, which just finished up with Relentless, you fill in a lot more backstory for the characters who were obviously around before Drizzt and his friends, but you're also moving things forward in their timeline. So,
Right.
what made you decide to take their adventures in this direction and to pair it with those particular stories from the past?
For about 15 years, I kept saying I think it was 15, maybe even more. I kept saying I wanted to write a book about Jarlaxle and Zacnafane, Drizzt's father and the crazy rogue that we've been seeing all these years. But before Drizzt was born, back in Menzer Baranzan. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. First, the game keeps changing. So the setting, I would have to do some retrofitting, which I didn't because I cheat. And second, Wizards of the Coast, when they were doing the publishing, wanted me to keep moving forward because they were moving more toward licensing and they wanted everybody to be on the same page, all the licensees, whatever. So they wouldn't let me go back in time because we just weren't doing enough books in the realms that my books could go back. They wanted them to keep pushing forward. Now things have changed and I was able to finally do that. I didn't want to do it completely. I didn't want to do it for the entire book, but I wanted to show, the old Mark Twain saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I wanted to show that. So you see Jarlaxle and Zacnafane and what they were going through, and it's even to the point where in this book it mirrors the story that was being told in Homeland about Drizzt's birth and growing up, except it's from a different perspective. And there's other things going on that the reader of Homeland wouldn't have known about. And to me, it's really important to do this because I keep seeing how Drizzt is this unique drow because he's not evil, and that's garbage. The drow are captives of Loth. And so by showing, every time I go back to Menzo Berenzano, or every time I bring new Drow into it, they're not like these evil monsters. It's Jarlaxle isn't, Zachnafane isn't, Virna wasn't, Braylon Janquet, the new one from the new series, isn't. Gromp isn't even a monster. So showing more of that was important to me, and showing more of what really was going on in that city, away from just the personal story of Drizzt, was important to me. And I got to do it, and I've been doing it for the last 10 books, actually, since the Companions, pretty much. But so it was important, and now was the time to tell that story, finally, of Jarlaxle and Zachnafane, because they're just so much fun.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, just the thing with Jarlaxle's hair alone was just hilarious. I mean, poor guy. That was a running gag that really had me laughing every single time it happened. But I'm going to try to keep the spoilers to a minimum. I'm assuming people have read it, but just in case, you never know. And so we've been following them through, like you said, so many campaigns since you introduced them. They've multi-class, they've got lots of new skills, they've gotten more powerful over time, but they've also definitely grown and changed as people. Do you have any arcs or changes that you're really especially proud of, or that you really love and that you love to write?
Oh yeah, Drizzt's change in the last few books.
Sorry.
He's going to take over, I'm telling you.
I know.
Drizzt's change in the last few books has been more philosophical than anything else. I mean, he's picked up he's learning from the monks. Mm-hmm. And, the word multi-class comes in because we're talking kind of a game setting. Yeah. But to me, that's more like if, somebody is raised in one religion and finds something else, or if somebody is questioning, mm-hmm. or if somebody, like, for example, I was a math major when I started college. Mm-hmm. How did that work out? People change, people grow, and the characters have to keep doing that, or it's not going to be, worth it. I think the most important one to me is the one that's going on with Camuriel. Mm-hmm. Drizzt too, but Camuriel, who has always been this kind of stayed back from it all, kind of intellectual, psionicist, emotionless, but he's not really. Mm-hmm. And now we're starting to see that he's not. And he's got some real issues, and you're beginning to find out that issues with Menzo Berenzano, issues with the Spider Queen. He is not Lothian. He can't stand her. If he could destroy Loth, the goddess Loth, he would do it with a thought. And like Zachnafane. But he never really fought about it. But what we've seen with Camuriel now is the ability to come out and reveal, maybe manipulate. I'm not going to get into that. But to move things in what he thinks is a better direction. So we're really starting to see who that character is. This happened with Gromp, I think, in the last series that I did with Wizards. It's happening with Camuriel now. The other one is Zachnafane. When Zac came back after being gone for 200 years, people were really upset because they were saying he's a racist. Well, of course he's somewhat. He's not a malignant racist, but of course he's the only thing he ever knew in his previous life was the drop. And he thought that, so of course he thinks them superior. Now he comes back and he sees his son, who's 100, 200 years older or whatever, married to a human, having a baby. What is going, he's more like Archie Bunker from All in the Family, where he's just out of time. Mm-hmm. And he has to come to accept things that he never thought he would never even think about. Mm-hmm. And Zac is based kind of on my dad, who was not Archie Bunker in this time. He was very tolerant, progressive, and forward thinking. But even my dad who was, wounded at Cherbourg in World War II, thought Muhammad Ali was one of the greatest philosophers of the 60s, really didn't fit in with his Italian community, which was very old school, if you will. Even my dad, were he to still be alive, bring him back from 36 years ago, would be looking at the world going, what the heck? Mm-hmm. I think we're all kind of looking at the world going, what the heck? But he would be really lost. And that's how I wanted to portray Zac. So that makes me feel good, because it kind of almost brings me back to that connection I had with my dad, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And it definitely, you have a lot of those connections. And that actually leads perfectly into my next question, which is that these are very much books rooted in notions of like family and found family and parenthood and friendship and love. And they also feel a lot like, kind of the best kind of D&D group where you're just all sharing this experience of getting into this world, creating the story together. And so how did those experiences for you as a parent, husband, friend, gamer, how do they affect all of these different themes that you're exploring in the story right now?
Strangely, one of the ones that affected them the least is gamer. Um, because I don't even think of the game when I'm writing the books, except the boundaries of the magic system and the geography of the world and some of the politics of the world. But really, these are books about people
Mm-hmm.
set in a world. If I was writing a book set in our world and our time, just a regular novel, the parameters of our world matter, of course, right? If you're going to California, it's going to take X amount of time to get there from Massachusetts or whatever. There's an ocean here, and we have technology that has limitations. They have magic, so all of those things play into it. But these stories are personal stories, not meaning personal to me. They're personal to the characters. And these are the things that I think are important. Once I started getting published, I quit. I was working at a high-tech company, and after about 5 years, I quit because the books were doing really well, and it was time for me to devote full time to work. My brother worked at that company. So I remember I went back to see him when a few years later, I went back. I just went to visit the company. I saw my brother all the time, but I went to see. So my brother came out and met me to bring me into the building. And a friend of ours, an old friend of mine that I hadn't seen in years, came up and he looked at my brother and he laughed and he goes, "Hey, Gary, how's it feel that your little brother is so much more successful than you?" And I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard, because my brother was a coach. He was a friend. He was like the most outgoing guy. Everybody loved him. Even the people who hated him in sports loved him. When he passed away, the line for his funeral was like a mile long. And they shut down the service department at Genrad so they could all show up for the funeral. And it was grown men crying. Everybody was devastated. I'm not more successful than my brother. That's success. All this rest of this stuff that we call success isn't. I don't buy it. I don't buy that your value is in what you do. It's who you are. And I don't buy that your value is in how much money you have at all. I think that is just garbage. To me, the more people who are smiling, crying and then smiling in the old memories when you're gone is the measure of success. And so that's how I want it to be for these characters. They love each other. They hang on each other. They need each other. That's what these books are all about. And that's what they've been about from the very beginning. Even to the point in creating the Drow, because I have 5 older sisters and they're the Drow.
I know that is a big mood. I definitely I inject some of those relationships also into my books, and so when you borrow from reality, it just makes things that much richer. And reading Regis's story in particular was definitely like he kind of anchors a lot of those kind of feelings, I think, in the book of the loyalty to family and the desire to kind of transcend, even your own limitations and become that better person like you're describing with your brother.
That's why The Companions was such an important book to me.
Yeah.
That was really it was a restart on the world, because a 4th edition had moved the world ahead 100 years, which kind of screwed up everything for everybody. But the idea of being able to do it again, the whole, if only I'd known then what I know now. So it gave me that opportunity to really show who Regis was, who Bruner was, who Caddy Bree is, because she's the one who really didn't change much. And then Wolfgar, of course, just looking at it as a chance to just have fun now, because he already lived his long life before. That book, I was leery about doing it, but it really allowed me to explore entirely new things with the characters. So I love it. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And also watching how Artemis even has changed. I mean, there are just so many character arcs that have come around.
Artemis was an interesting one, because the way I had to make Artemis change was Artemis had to learn to look into a mirror and not hate what he saw. And that was the whole Sellswords trilogy did that. I thought the Sellswords trilogy, by the way, the Brother of the Patriarch, was the end of Artemis. I was thinking he was written out of the story. He had his redemption arc, if you will, his personal redemption, where he didn't hate himself anymore, so he could excise those demons. I thought that was the end of his story. But I got so many letters from people saying, no, you can't let this be the end of Artemis, because I have to see him loving himself. I have to see him accepting who he is and going forward with a clear conscience. And they were telling me all these personal stories about themselves or their friends who had gone through something like that. And that's why he stuck around. That was a reader thing more than me, because I would have just ended it there without him.
But it's cool
he was supposed to die in the second book.
And then where would we be, right?
I don't know. I don't know.
It would be a very different story. Yeah, wow. I mean, I can't even imagine that now. It's funny to hear those kinds of inside bits, because it's like, we, the readers on this side of things, never really see any of that. And we only get the story, we receive it as it comes to us, kind of. And so to think of those possible alternate, multiverse realities where all these other things happen is just, woo.
Well, Artemis has almost left the story several times.
Mm-hmm.
I only threw him in at the end of the Crystal Shard because I was working in finance and I liked it, but I loved writing and I loved being paid to write, and I wanted to write another book. So at the end of the Crystal Shard, on a whim, I just threw in a couple of hooks. Bruno needed to go back to Mithril Hall, and the halfling seeing Artemis and Trary, this legendary assassin, showing up in town. He was just thrown in. It was just a name I pulled out of the air and threw him into the books. I figured he'd be dead in the next book. And here we are 30 plus years later, and this guy just won't die.
No matter how hard you try, you're working.
It was funny because talking about the game, they when first edition went to second edition, I got a phone call that said, "How are you going to get rid of Artemis?" I said, "Artemis." At this point, I was writing the Dark Elf books, which take place, 80 years before Artemis was even born. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? How am I going to get rid of Artemis? What do you want me to kill his grandparents? And they were, oh, no. In second edition, there were no assassins. They're writing them out of the game. So they're all being killed, but we're going to let you kill Artemis because we really like him. I'm like, I'm not killing Artemis. Jeff Grubb and I were on the phone. We're having this big argument. He's like, Bob, I don't want you to kill him either, but you have to because there were no assassins. And finally, after about 20 minutes, I said, wait a minute, he's not an assassin. And Jeff said, what do you mean? I said, he's a fighter thief who takes money to kill people. And Jeff goes, we can do that. And that's how Artemis survived second edition.
Oh, my God. So I'm actually... That sort of leads into my next question, which involves the rule books. So you've got your spells, your magical items, the skills that are in the rule books. It's always fun to see that kind of manifested on the page. But as you've been talking about, it's like how do those rules and how does the lore influence you, and how has that changed over the years? Or is it more like you were just describing that you kind of get on the phone and are like, wait, no, this is the story that I want to tell. How can we make this work? And it's more of a kind of back and forth.
TSR and then Wizards give me room. It's that simple. Yeah. Look, every few years they come out with the definitive Forgotten Realms timeline or the definitive Forgotten Realms map, and that's the map, and that's definitive for about 2 or 3 years, and they do it again. They change the rules. When I started, they had infravision, so Narbondel, the time clock of Menzo Burns Island, would glow with heat, right? And then that's gone. Now it's low light vision. So how's that work? It's just. I can't get too much into the minutia. And even with the realms themselves, there's so much material out there, and it's contradictory. There's so much contradictory material. It's 33 years.
Yes. And
the only person who started working on the realms, who's still working in the realms, is probably me. Because Ed Greenwood's doing work with Dungeon Masters Guild, but that's not canon. There's that word that everyone who loves an IP hates and loves at the same time is canon. So when I'm doing things, I try to do a lot of things in unreliable narrator. So it's the characters talking. Because if a character's telling you what's going on in a different part of the realms, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. And that way, if the source book goes against it, well, the source book goes against it. That's not a conflict. That's a character-driven issue. Let me close my other screen because it's beeping.
Oh no.
So, I do things like unreliable narrator. I very rarely nail down the dates unless there's a specific, like in the new books I did, I would show you the dates because I was going back in time and then forward. So I had to show you the transition for each section, but I always am kind of vague about time of year, dates, and when I'm talking about histories of things, because I know, not just I don't know them, because there's no way I have the time to read 500 source books or whatever, modules and all the rest of it. I just don't have the time to keep up with what everyone else is doing. So not only do I not know it all about the realms, I know it's going to change, even if I do know it all. When I wrote the Thousand Orcs, they asked me to use a character from the new edition of D&D. And I chose Obul, and I said, well, you'll let me use this character. I'm going to kill him. And they said, oh, yeah, no problem. You can kill him. So I turned in the book, and they came back and said, well, you really can't kill him. I'm like, what the heck? And now I've got 2 months of work retrofitting that. So I've learned enough to stay away from it as much as I can. As far as things like the magic system go, I do pay attention, and I will go and look at but they're so different. Yeah. And you have to be so careful how you do that anyway, because the needs of a game and the needs of a novel are two different things. I mean, I don't want to have my wizard getting up in the morning, I'm going to memorize these spells today. That just doesn't sing in a novel. In a game, it's necessary. So, I try to balance it. I've been trying to balance it since I started. It was way easier back then because the realms had the gray box, the original gray box of the realms had vast areas where nobody knew what was there. I don't think I would have ever gotten away with the name Guinevere now, because that's the Celtic spelling of Arthur's queen for the panther. I don't think I would have gotten away with that now in the realms. That's not a realm's name. That's an Arthurian name.
Yeah. But in some ways you created a lot of the canon, and so that's the benefit of being the progenitor.
Well, that was the beauty. Menzel Berenzan was my creation. Icewind Dale was my creation. The Spirit Soaring was my creation. Mithril Hall was my creation. Gauntlgrim was my addition to like a very little bit of lore that was there. So the Spirit Soaring, the Monastery of the Yellow Rose was there in modules, old modules, but it wasn't fleshed out. So I've either fleshed out areas or completely created them. And most of the early writers all did that. The early writers were the ones who created the realms dead areas, the ones that weren't in the game. Yeah.
Yeah, the stuff would not be there without all of you and all of your work. So it's like it's great to have that kind of interplay. But the weight of the sort of accumulations of everything, it gets to be a lot after a while.
Yeah, eventually they'll hit it with a comet and wipe the slate blank again.
Just go full DC and just it's all over.
How do you keep up? It's a different world now that we live in, and it's 33 years of dozens of people working on a world are going to produce so much. I think people always say to me, "Are you mad Disney made your book not canon, the Star Wars books that I wrote?" And it's like, I'm not mad. The books are still there. If you like them and you want to read them, read them. Disney bought it. They're doing what they think is best for going forward, not for what came before. And that's not a debate I ever want to get into. But it is incredibly hard to have a fictional world keep going decade after decade. And somehow the realms are doing it. They're still surviving. They're still thriving. People still love it. And D&D is bigger than it's ever been. So we've all been doing something right, intentionally or otherwise. But somehow it worked.
Oh, yeah. And it just keeps going. And like you said, the beauty of it is that when you are not intrinsically beholden to everything, you as a writer, you can just keep going and you don't ever have to look back, really. Like you can just keep producing new cool stuff.
Well, I do have to get it approved. The Wizards gets to read everything I do before HarperCollins, Harper Voyager publishes it, but they give me a lot of latitude. And we've been on the same page for several years now on how we had to handle the Drow going forward in a much better way. When I created the Drow, they were based on Menzel Berenzan was based on the 5 families of New York, the Mafia. From Puzo's The Godfather was actually my source material for Menzel Berenzan. And because the idea of like are they just an evil, this whole concept of evil race? It doesn't make sense. They'd all be dead. They'd all kill each other. And that's just boring. I don't buy that. People of any in the realm species are individual first. So I don't buy the whole shared alignment. You know, everybody has the same motivation. I just don't. That's boring to me. Except for the mind flayers, maybe because they're all joined so much by one.
It's a hive mind. Yeah.
But other than that, it would either be demonic creatures or, undead under the control of some necromancer or something. Other than that, people away from those few examples, individuals are individual.
Yeah, that was going to literally be my next question, which, without spoiling anything for the end of Relentless, you definitely have promised a lot of changes going forward. And I was going to ask about how that fit into the new push to adjust the descriptions of the different races in the D&D rule books. And so it did occur independently?
I outlined Relentless. I knew I was going to do this 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it just seems to be hitting the right time for it to come out. But I also want you, I'm not going to spoil too much.
Yeah.
But remember that everything that you heard that was the truth in Relentless was unreliable narrative.
Yes.
And that's on purpose because I can't tell wizards where to go with their creation, with their intellectual property. So for me, this is where I think they should go. And this is something I'm going to continue to write going forward. But as far as whether that backstory is the actual reason, the things that are going to happen if I go forward, or however they decide to go forward, if they decide to take it forward, won't necessarily mean that backstory has to be true.
Because it comes from an ancient place, yeah. So and it comes from like you said, an unreliable source potentially, and even in the book, it was stated that might be unreliable. So
look at our own world. We're way advanced in terms of being able to date things, dig up ruins, and we have transcribe ancient writings. We're way ahead of the Forgotten Realms in that regard. And yet, if you go back in our world 2,000 years, you'll have all different people arguing about whether something really happened. Was it really a worldwide flood? And some people believe, Noah and the Ark and that whole thing. Other people don't. They argue over the origins of the major figures in our religions and in the traditions. So the idea that you can look back, you can't look back 250 years and know you have the whole correct story, right? We're seeing that in our own country right now. They go back and they do. When you look at what really, I grew up thinking George Washington had wooden teeth and never told a lie. That's what I was taught in school. Well, come to find out, one of George Washington's dentures was made from the teeth pulled from the mouths of slaves. I didn't know that. I was never taught that. It's just history is not. There is a true part of history. There are true facts that you can determine, but there are so many things and agendas will push around those facts. They didn't want to say things like that about the founders, if you will, when I was a kid in school.
Often still don't, yeah.
Oh, they still. Look at what we're doing now. We're still fighting over it, right?
Yep.
And so hopefully, people will read this book and understand that it is unreliable narrators, or maybe it's not, or maybe it is, or maybe it's not. But what goes forward will go forward based on what they think is true.
Yeah, the choices that they make are going to be impacted by these decisions that they've made and the information that has been given to them, and then they'll proceed accordingly, whether it's right or wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. So thinking about, again, the characters and how they've grown and changed, they're all pretty epic level at this point in D&D terms, right? I think Drizzt is like multi-class level 20 and everything in all the rule books now. So for both writers and DMs, one of the challenges in dealing with this kind of long-running campaign is raising the stakes increasing the levels of risk and danger as everyone gets stronger and more powerful. So how do you approach that? And do you have advice on how to manage those kinds of like higher level encounters and quests and things like that?
Again, it goes back to the difference between a book and a game.
Yeah.
And I always use the knife in the back scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I used to work with a guy when I was working in the nightclubs. I worked with a guy who was he ran a martial arts studio. He was like a 7th degree black belt or something. I mean, he was a real bad dude. Didn't want mad at you. In D&D terms, he would have been 15th level, 10th level anyway. You know, I mean, probably 20th level, because I don't know that there were very many people around who could have ever gotten in a ring with him and come out alive.
Right.
Okay, so 20th level D&D character like that, and a first level rogue wants to make a name for himself. And he walks up behind the 20th level character who's distracted, talking to a friend or something, and he stabs him in the back with a long knife. What happens in D&D? The 20th level character feels a slight pinch, turns around and crushes, if the rogue even hits him, which he probably won't. Even if he's behind and, you know, he's got probably a 50% chance of even hitting him.
Rolls a natural 20, who knows?
Even if he rolls a natural 20, that 20th level character turns around and obliterates him with one swing, just over.
Right.
In the real world, going back to the guy I knew, if some little punk who was trying to make a name for himself walked up behind him and shoved a knife into his back, what would happen? He'd fall down screaming. There's your threat. The threat comes from not thinking in terms of level of character. In a fair-up fight, Drizzt or Zaknafein and Trary, Jarlaxle, any of those guys, Caddy Bree, Danica from the Cleric Quintet, Dahlia, Penelope Harple, Grumph Band, all of these characters, in a fair-up fight with an average person would obliterate them. But there are a lot of people who aren't average people out there. And there are a lot of monsters that aren't average people power out there. So to me, if a red dragon's going to breathe fire on you, you're going to hurt. I don't care what your game stats say. If somebody walks up behind you, sticks a knife in your back, you're falling down. I don't care what your game stats say. When you take it away from the game terms, the threat remains.
Yeah, and it's just about finding the right threat for the right moment in the story itself for the characters, and making it feel, making the reader feel certain emotions as the thing is happening.
Yeah, not too many books ago in the series, when Drizzt was already considered an epic level character, if you will, he got into a fair fight with O'Bould, and O'Bould was winning that fight. The real world and game world are two different things. They both serve different purposes on the edges and the same purpose in the middle. Entertain you and keep you on the edge of your seat.
Awesome. And so, speaking of fight scenes, as we were, I know you get asked a lot about fight scenes because they're awesome. So I've always loved your fight scenes, just the level of detail, but those emotional beats and how you use all the different classes, their skills, their magical items, especially Jarlaxle. My God, every time he pulls something off his belt, it's like, what does he have in his pockets?
He's my walking Deus Ex Machina. Yes.
Oh my gosh, but it's so great though, because he reuses stuff, so then you get to see it again and see him use it in different ways, and so how do you put together these fights, and how much of that is organized by how D&D structures combat? I guess not a lot, and so it's more just kind of like what items are good for what situation, and sort of how do you construct that as you go?
Yeah, first a quick thing about Jarlaxle. I like this one. When in the early books, Jarlaxle would show up, and he'd always pull out a new magic item or do something weird. It's like a Batman utility belt type thing, whatever. And he was just a lark, and he really was my walking Deus Ex Machina. Like, he wouldn't solve the main conflict of the book, but he would always help with the little conflicts by doing something, by pulling out a different magic item. And then when I went to write the Sellswords books, it was actually Servant of the Shard was the first one. It was in Paths of Darkness. Then they moved it to the Sellswords because they wanted to expand on Jarlaxle and Trary. Different story. But anyway, I get to use him as a main character for the first time. Because Jarlaxle and Trary were going to be the main characters in the book. And I was all excited. And then I realized, oh my God, I have no idea what he's got for magic items that I've detailed in the past. I have no idea. Because, now we're talking 10 years of writing.
It's like flipping through the books, like, what did I do? Oh
I had no time. I only had a few months.
Yeah.
So I went on a message board. This was back, message boards were the way the internet worked, before social media.
Yes.
I went on a message board. In fact, back then, I think EverQuest was the only social media. EverQuest and Ultima Online, right? They were the social media. But anyway, I went on a message board anonymously. And I said, hey, guys, let's do a catalog of Jarlaxle's cool items. And 3 days later, I had this 10-page thread that I downloaded. The readers were great because they were saying what book it was in, giving page numbers, IBID. It was like they were writing college papers on Jarlaxle's items. So I got to look them all. I knew exactly where to look at them all. Whew, saved me because I never would have made that deadline.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
But the way I do battle scenes typically is, if it's one-on-one, I just want to know the area around them. And I want to do something a little different, but it's hard sometimes when it's just one-on-one. So I just let the battle, I watch it. I just write it as I'm watching it in my head. If it's larger scale, I want to definitely prep the area so I know where they're going to fight.
Right.
Like the battle at the end of Relentless had to have that, I'm not going to give it away, but had to have that one entrance to the field that they knew many would be using.
Or even just the other battles in Gauntlegrim, there was a lot of choreography there.
Yeah, I want to know what the area looks like and how I can either use it to the advantage of whichever side I want to use it to be using it that way, or as a hindrance. And then I just kind of let the battle flow, and I try and think of it as tactically from I'm a big Civil War buff, and of course most of the books you used to read on the Civil War would show you the tactics of the battles, and I've followed that up. I'm very interested in that type of thing. And as far as the personal fighting goes, I was a bouncer for years. I boxed in high school. I was a hockey player all my life. You got to learn those things. But when I'm writing the battle scenes, it's more a matter of controlling the language than anything else, because I know when it's getting fast, I want the action to move faster. First of all, first thing you do when you write a battle scene is get rid of the verb to be, throw it away. Everything's active voice, or as much as you can. But you'll see my paragraphs get shorter, my sentences get shorter, my sentence fragments get shorter as the battle gets to fast points, because I want the reader to be reading at the same pace that the fighters are fighting. And I always pay attention to the way their feet are and the balance, because that's everything in a fight is balance. So I wrote them out of frustration, because I was doing the thing with Terry Brooks not long ago, and we were talking about this. And I remember reading Wish Song of Shannara, which is one of my favorite books, and Garrett Jacks. I love the character Garrett Jacks, and Terry has this. He's about to have this massive fight with this Daemon creature, the big baddie. And it's going to be Garrett Jacks one-on-one with him. And then we cut away, and then we come back, and Garrett Jacks, its fight's over, and Garrett Jacks is sitting against the cliff on the ledge. And I was like,
what happened?
Somebody cut a chapter out of my book. Where's the fight? But the older fantasy books, they never really showed you the fights. I mean, probably one of the most detailed I can think of is Helm's Deep. They always talked in kind of, metaphor and emotion and all the rest of it, instead of showing me the fight. I want to see the fight, right? So I decided I was going to go full bore on, and I was going to show the fights. And that's why I didn't do Dark Elf in first person. I was going to do the Dark Elf trilogy when I was going back to tell where Drizzt came from in first person. Now that's really hard to write. I think Roger Zelazny's the best that ever did it.
Oh yeah, Amber's good.
I could never approach that, so I said, this could be tougher than I think. But also it was the fight scenes, because I want if in the fight scene I'm staying in one person's head, I can't show you what's going on over there, going on over there, going on back there. So if I look back there, the guy in front of me sticks me with a sword, and I'm dead. So, I stayed in third person for the fight scenes for that reason. I would just kind of dive into the heads of the different people. And the other thing is, this is I feel about fight scenes, not so much anymore, but in the older movies, the same way I feel about the way they describe authors, right? You watch movies that show authors, right?
Yeah.
And the editor shows up at their retreat that the author has on a lake, and the editor and the author work together, and you see the editor bringing all these. It's like I never even met my editors for years when I started writing, other than phone calls. This before Zoom, right?
Right.
I had no idea who they were.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not real.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was real once upon a time, but that's just total garbage.
Or the agent shows up, or just like.
And I felt the same way about a lot of the fight scenes I used to watch, and like the old West, or how somebody would walk up and punch someone and knock them out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't punch someone and knock them out. I mean, if you throw 500 punches, you might knock somebody out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, against 500 different people. I mean, you can't walk up to someone and bonk them on the back of the head and knock them out. That's not how it works. They yell, oh, and they scream and they roll around on the ground, and and if they're not hurt too bad, they get up and they throw something back at you. And it drives me insane watching this. The tropes became so simplistic and so ridiculous, and also so clean, right? You'd show people in these fights, and I got to tell you, fights are ugly. And they're painful, and they leave scars, and they leave marks, and people go to the hospital. This idea of this clean bar fight, there ain't no such thing. If there's a bar fight and it gets out of control, there are going to be people hurt really bad, even without weapons, because there are plenty of weapons and glasses and bottles and all the rest of it.
Tables, chairs.
You don't walk out of the bar laughing at it, you know? So I could forgive the Warriors for doing things like that. It's all about the stylistic beauty of the underworld of New York, if it was. I love that movie. Yeah. But that's just not the way it was, you know? And I grew up in an age where movies started getting grittier about things like that, like The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now, where they started showing the horrors involved, not just the glory part of it, but the horrors involved.
Full Metal Jacket,
Full Metal Jacket. And I wanted to do that with fight scenes in fantasy as well. I wanted it to be, now they're not realistic because I'm not writing about human beings. I'm writing about elves that can jump up in the air, spin around 4 times. It's more
levitate and cast darkness.
If I had to look at the choreography that I would most rely on for fight scenes, it would probably be Crouching Tiger.
Yes,
Dragon. Because the choreography in that, it wasn't just super fast and superhuman. It was super beautiful.
Yes.
I mean, when they're running through the trees and they're bouncing off the branches, he's chasing her through the trees. And I think it's Yo-Yo Ma playing in the background through the whole thing. It really was. I mean, it's like just this gorgeous dance. And so I wanted to incorporate that plus the brutality plus the reality.
And just bring it all together and kind of
bring it all together.
Yeah. And like you were saying with first person, it's like in a real fight, things just go so fast that how do you even... You blink and it's over almost, and your body, and a lot of that happens in the books too. But because it's third person, even though their bodies are just going through these motions. I mean, Zach practices his move that I will not disclose because of spoilers, but practices it over and over and over again until
because he knows that's where the attack is likely to come from. That he's expecting.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he has one counter that he thinks up, and he just makes it until it's automatic, just reflex. It's not. He doesn't think about it because, and that's the difference between like a boxer. And somebody who just gets in fights once in a while, right?
Right.
I was a pretty good bouncer. If I got in a ring with a real boxer, I'd be dead in 30 seconds. Because these are people who have trained themselves to see situations and have options, like way more than I ever did. But Zach, that's Zach, and that's Drizzt, but that's definitely Zach. That's how he looks at the situation he's anticipating, and he trains his body to have a counter ready. Which is why, like in the earliest book, when Drizzt surprised him on the double cross down and kicked him in the face, he was like, you can't do that. That's an improvisation he never saw before.
Right. And so he didn't have a counter for it. It was just like...
Have a counter for it. Yeah. It was like Ali rope-a-doping Foreman, right? Yeah. Ali just got there and let him punch himself out and then knocked him cold.
Yep.
It was brilliant. And Ali was brilliant. And that's...
And again, to talk about structuring and leveling things up, it's like you can never anticipate the next guy who has something that you've never seen before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if they have 4 arms.
Well, yeah. Or I think you had one with 6 actually in this book, 6 swords, that I can't remember who went up against that demon, but that was a fun one too.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm sure that you get asked about your favorites a lot, and we were talking about just some of the different fights and items and stuff like that. But do you have any kinds of like character classes or alignments, or that you find the most fun or interesting to write, or favorite magical items or weapons, and has that changed over time as not just new things have been introduced into D&D, but that as you have kind of come up with these new things to just interject and make stuff more fresh and interesting?
Sure, not alignments,
Hmm.
because we don't even do that in our games.
Hmm.
Because to me, in our games, I don't know about other people, but I assume it's the same. In our games, if somebody said they were playing an evil character to the DM, they whispered, "I'm playing an evil character." It was only so they could do something scummy to the group and get away with it,
Yeah,
like
no, and
steal
that
all the
sucks.
treasure. And to
Yeah.
me, that was just ridiculous, because then the other characters are forced with, well, we're going to kill him or kick him out of the group, and then your whole campaign goes. So, and besides, alignments to me change with mood, right?
Yeah.
There are times when people think I'm the sweetest, lawful, good guy in the world, and other times where I'm chaotic, roaring, right? So I don't buy alignments. I think there's good and bad in everybody, usually, unless there's something seriously wrong with the person.
I mean, that comes out in the books, definitely. So that's why that was one of my curiosities.
I throw a line. If someone says to me what alignment, I try to come up with what. If someone says what alignment is Jarl Axel, I would say he's chaotic.
Chaotic badass. I don't know.
But he's not. He's not evil. Is he chaotic neutral? Well, not really. Is he chaotic good? Well, he does some bad things. He does some good. No, he's chaotic. This is about the best I could get. And then even when I'm thinking about that, he may be chaotic, but he's got a code that he lives by like everybody else.
Yeah.
So how chaotic is he really? And it just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't even think about alignment when I'm writing characters or whatever. As far as classes go, one of the reasons I write fantasy instead of Westerns or, World War II stories or whatever is because to me, the big change in our world came with the gun, right? Before the gun, to be really badass, you had to train to be that way. There was a level of discipline. And if you've ever studied martial arts, there's a level of emotional control that goes with it. Right? So to me, that's the romantic part of the fighting pre-gun, because you couldn't just pick up a sword and take somebody out, or a bow, unless you got really lucky.
Right.
And the level of skill, it took incredible dedication, but along with that training comes the training of the mind as to when to use it. So to me, like I've always loved the monk class, and my Demon Wars world is all about monks, and not the monks of D&D, but all about people who dedicate their lives to, and I can't say that it's all about monks. If you want to go talk in terms of classes, you have knights and you have soldiers and you have all kinds of different things. But I always kind of gravitate toward that idea of training and making a point of, you become a hero because you work at becoming a hero. I think you saw that very keenly with Regis in the second round.
Just what are you working on now? Do you have any new stories that we should all be getting hyped about because they're coming for us soon?
Everything's a little unclear because I took the first 4 months of this year off, then COVID hit, and I'm trying to figure out what's next. There's one more thing I would like to do if we get to that point with the Drow and with Drizzt. I think there's one more. And of course, I say one more, but then when I write the one more, I'll find 5 more that I forgot that I want to do. So that's hanging out there. And after writing the Coven, there's that character that really came into my heart in the Coven. I want to tell more of her story, but I want to do it completely removed from everything I've done in the earlier Demon War books, because the world is a very different place than it was then. And so, yeah, I have an idea for something I think will just be a ton of fun in that, and then we'll see if I get to it. But again, it's if I get to it. The only thing I've got that is really in any way, shape, or form ready is I wrote a young adult book with a friend of mine. The two of us got together and wrote this fun story for a publisher that was looking for that and asked me to do it, and I said, I don't know anything about the young adult market, really. But my friend is a young adult writer. We got together and we wrote a book together. It's the only time I've ever done that. Right now, I'm not ready to talk about anything, which is interesting for me, because the 4 months I took off this year were the first days I had taken off since 1987, I think.
Oof. Well, you earned it.
I write Christmas morning. I write New Year's Eve. I just, it was nice to be able to go to bed at night without having a book in my head. It was nice to be able to, like, I used to go to my kids' hockey games, and in between periods when the Zamboni's out on the ice, I'd be typing, freezing up in the stands and typing.
Yeah.
But I did it, and I take my daughter to her horseback riding, and while she's tacking up the horse, I'm in the office typing. I go watch her ride, and then she's got to wash the horse and untack the horse and wash the horse, and I'm in the office typing because I just couldn't. It was like a curse. I couldn't get rid of it, and now I've kind of found a better life balance.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much of that I want to surrender to keep going, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, I am out of questions at this point. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to all of us. I say all of us because while I'm the only one here, ostensibly, you will be viewed by many, many people when this airs. And so thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for these books, all the books that you've written. Thank you for the ones that will come from these going forward. And just thank you for your time. All right. So thank you again for coming. I am once again Valerie Valdes, author of Chilling Effect and the forthcoming Prime Deceptions, which will be out next month, less than a month now, I think, although September 8th, I'll say it because I don't know when this is going to be airing. And thank you again to R.A. Salvatore for his amazing work, his books, his new trilogy.
Watch out for cats. Watch out for them. Did they take
Relentless
over in the second book? Don't ruin it for me.
I will not ruin it for you, but yeah. And then in the third book is going to be out in 2022, and that one's just going to be wild because why not? If you're going to go out, you go out big, right? So Relentless is out now. Everybody check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one. Enjoy the rest of the con.